The mention of the word Christmas brings to mind Santa Claus, sleigh rides, decorated trees, children laughing as they barrel down snow-covered hills in their sleds, and the coming together of family. For many people in the world, it is their favorite holiday, and one of the happiest times of the year. On the day after Thanksgiving, and sometimes even the day of, stores open with deals on possible Christmas presents, and throngs of people rush into the melee that is Black Friday, attempting to score the best deals for their family and hope to elicit a surprising response on Christmas morning as their child or loved one unwraps the hard-won present in the battles they waged at Walmart, Best Buy, and Target. How did we get to this celebration? How has the holiday evolved over the years, and why do we keep some of these traditions? I hope to answer those questions and more as I take you through the journey of how Christmas came to be what it is today. When one speaks about Christmas and uses the word Christmas, we tend to use the term in two different ways. One of the ways is to refer to the nativity scene and the birth of Jesus. That is the most common way people use the term when they say the holiday has lost its meaning. Sometimes the birth of Jesus is referred to as the first Christmas. The second way that we use the term is to refer to the celebration of the holiday or the holiday season. This video will talk about both terms and how they have come together. Midwinter celebrations are nothing new to human civilization. Anthropologists are quick to point out that mid to late December environmentally is one of the most logical times to conduct a celebration. Farmers have brought in harvests, so fresh food is readily available. The cold weather also signaled the perfect time to slaughter livestock because the meat would keep in the cold temperatures, and communities would not have to feed so many animals through the winter. Plus, the days are shorter. The sun sets sooner, and in times without electric lighting, heating, and air conditioning, winter was a scary time for the human race because it was so difficult to survive. People stayed in their houses more, attempting to keep warm, and psychological studies have proven that wintertime is the worst time for depression and other mental illnesses. Cabin fever runs wild, and humans crave social interaction and to get out of their houses. This combination of factors led to the creation of midwinter festivals that existed before the birth of Jesus. This is also what most people refer to when they say that Christmas has pagan roots, which they mean non-Christian, but in this case it is pre-Christian. Researcher Bruce David Forbes explains it well when he says another way to view it is that a midwinter celebration is simply an understandable human impulse to help people survive winter. If a culture did not already have a celebration, people would make one up. Participating in a midwinter festival is an indication of our common humanity across many cultures and religions. It just makes sense as a human coping mechanism. So what are some of the most notable winter celebrations that we can trace down through history? Around 200 BC, we have some well-documented accounts of the Roman celebration of Saturnalia. Named after the Roman god Saturn, by the era of Christianity he had become viewed as an agricultural god who had built a village on one of the 7 hills of Rome. He was said to have taught people how to grow crops and thus highly important to the Romans as a sustainer of life. The Romans celebrated Saturn on December 17th, with feasting and partying that lasted anywhere from 3 to 7 days. It was a charitable celebration and no one worked except those who had to help put on the party. Houses and streets were decorated with greenery, and since it was winter, the little green available was mostly evergreens. They symbolized life during the darkest days of winter when other trees had seemingly died. Candles and lamps would line the streets and homes to fight back the early sunsets, and small gifts were exchanged. This holiday was based upon egalitarianism or equality. A Greek commentator on the Roman culture and society in the 2nd century AD wrote, "Each man shall take the couch where he happens to be. Rank, family, or wealth shall have little influence on privilege of where he sits. All shall drink the same wine, and neither stomach trouble nor headache shall give the rich man an excuse for being the only one to drink the better quality. All shall have their meat on equal terms. The waiter shall not show favor to anyone. Neither are large portions to be placed before one and tiny ones before another." A reversal of roles played a large part in the celebration. Masters were to wait on slaves, and slaves would be relieved of their duty during the multiple-day celebration. Additionally, a mock king would be chosen from the community who would have free reign over the partiers. Let's move a little further north to Northern Europe. Scandinavian countries and places like Germany before Christian influence had similar celebrations to Romans. We know of winter celebration called Yule. Like the Romans, Northern Europeans brought in their harvest in late fall and killed livestock to sustain themselves through the winter. The freshly harvested vegetables and fruit could be distilled into alcohol. Large parties would erupt through the communities. One tradition the Scandinavians had was their focus on the dead and their ancestors. It was a time to remember family gone by the past year. Sitting around fires in their houses, those people would hear the howling winds outside and tell ghost stories about how those sounds were the ancestors going on wild hunts with Odin, a one-eyed patriarchal god who rode an 8-legged horse. Germans would call this Asgardrite, or Asgard's Ride. A central feature of Yule was the use of fire. Bonfires and candles were burnt to ward off evil spirits and to warm ancestral spirits. Here we get the introduction of the Yule log, a log that could be burned for days. The next year, last year's coals will be used to ignite the new Yule log. For early Christians, there was no Christmas. Churches centered their focus around the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Therefore, Easter was their main holiday. The birth of Jesus was not observed as a holiday by early Christians. A good example of these early Christians' emphasis on death rather than birth is the recording of the saints. They recorded their death dates specifically rather than their birth dates, because when they died they achieved the real birth that transitioned them to eternal life. Therefore, little interest was paid towards nativity by early Christians. An early Christian writer named Origen basically stated that birthday celebrations were for pagans, not Christians. Another reason that early Christians did not celebrate the birth of Jesus was simply they did not know the exact date. Early Christians from the 2nd century onward attempted to find an exact date. Some came up with March 25th or March 28th, April 19th, April 20th, and November 18th, to name a few. It was this uncertainty that made it difficult for them to celebrate his birth. However, there is an early celebration by Eastern Christians. Eastern Christians were located in the Greek-influenced eastern portion of the Roman Empire that stretched from Greece east to Syria and south to Egypt. They had a celebration called Epiphany, which means manifestation or showing forth, and it was meant to celebrate the realization of Jesus as the Son of God. Different groups celebrated different events in Jesus' life. Some believed that he was shown to be the Son of God when he performed various miracles. Some believed it was when he was baptized, and some revered the birth. However, there was no universal meaning for the celebration. Different regions or groups celebrated different events. Epiphany was celebrated on January 6th, the same day as the Egyptian winter festival, so the holiday may have been created in order to combat other religious holidays in the region. Nevertheless, this is one of, if not the earliest accounts of a special day set aside to celebrate the birth of Jesus, even though that was not the only event celebrated during that day. We find that by the late 300s, ancient calendars of Western Christians, those centered around Roman influence and spoke Latin, marked December 25th as the day of the birth of Jesus. Quickly, the Western Christian influences spread as well as the Eastern Christians, and each adopted the other's special day. Now, both groups celebrated December 25th as Jesus' birthday, and January 6th as Epiphany, or the day of his baptism, or more generally, his manifestation as the Son of God. But why did the Western Christians adopt December 25th? For that answer, we need to dive into the religious struggles that were emerging in Europe around that time. Constantine, the Roman emperor from 306 to 307, ended the persecution of Christians within the empire. This meant that Christians no longer had to worship in private or secret, and they could prominently conduct themselves as Christians and celebrate their holidays in public. However, other religions existed in the Roman Empire, the more prominent one being the worshipping of the sun god Sol, or Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Saturnalia lasted from December 17th until December 23rd, and Calends began on New Year's Day and lasted several days. The celebration of the sun god Sol Invictus was celebrated on December 25th, based on their calendar where the days started to get longer, symbolizing his birth. Some groups connected the sun god with another god called Mithras, who was the god of light and truth, but became heavily associated with the sun, so much so that the two gods became combined into Sol Invictus Mithras. Constantine's religious toleration of Christians allowed them to worship openly and combat the other religions present in the Roman Empire, particularly the large winter festivals. Historians believe that the development of December 25th as Jesus' birthday is a direct result of early Christians attempting to solidify and center their religious holiday in conjunction with an already established series of festivals and celebrations. The Council of Tours proclaimed that from Christmas on December 25th until Epiphany on January 6th would be part of one whole celebration. and that's how we get the 12 days of Christmas. But as one researcher explains, the variation extends even to the issue of how to count the days. If Christmas is the first of the 12 days, then Twelfth Night would be on January 5th, the eve of Epiphany. If December 26th, the day after Christmas, is the first day, then the 12th night falls on January 6th, the evening of Epiphany itself. This demonstrates that Christmas was a fusion of pre-existing winter festivals and Christian themes. So this brings us to our next topic. We have gotten to Christmas established on a day. Now, how did its symbols and traditions materialize? Let's first look at the legend of the Christmas tree. The story goes that a monk, later saint, named Boniface, witnessed some people conducting a winter sacrifice to Thor in front of an oak tree dedicated to the god of thunder. Boniface, enraged at the display of paganism and disregard for Christianity, took an axe and with one mighty blow cut the large oak tree down. The people thought surely that the god of thunder would strike him down with a lightning bolt for doing such an act, but when no lightning bolt came, they believed that displayed superiority of Boniface's god. Here's where the story has many versions. Some said that Boniface planted a fir tree in the oak's place. Others said a fir tree had been growing near the root system of the oak, and finally that a fir sprang up from the center of the cut oak. Boniface claimed that it, with its triangular shape that symbolized the Trinity, and that its pointing to the heavens made it the tree of the Christ child that gave eternal life. Of course, this story is legend, but it does demonstrate that Christians do not simply conquer and replace religious traditions, but adapted other celebrations and festivals into their own holiday. Pope Gregory I said as much in the year 601 in a letter to Bishop Augustine of Canterbury. The idols' temples of that race should by no means be destroyed, but only the idols in them. Take holy water and sprinkle it in these shrines, build altars, and place relics in them. When this people see that their shrines are not destroyed, they will be able to banish error from their hearts, and be more ready to come to the places where they are familiar with, but now recognizing the worshiping of the true God. So how did the Christmas tree become a staple of the holiday? Well, we have seen through this video that greenery has been associated with winter festivals before Christmas. One possible explanation for the use of a Christmas tree is paradise plays. Since most people could not read the Bible in the Middle Ages, churches and entertainment groups would put on biblical plays in order to teach people the stories of the Bible. The play The Feast of Adam and Eve would occur on December 24th with an evergreen prop decorated with apples and unleavened bread with candles surrounding it. The play would depict the fall of man into sin and the birth of a Savior, which his birth would be celebrated the next day. The tradition of paradise plays is still present themselves in Christmas culture in some European countries because their Christmas trees are called paradise trees. Another possible explanation comes from Germany and its tradition of a Christmas pyramid or Lichtstock, which is a wooden structure where evergreen branches would be placed and along with candles, candy, and gifts. Germany seems to be the center of the Christmas tree historical record. The symbol most commonly appeared in Lutheran northern Germany. The southern Catholic Germans were more apt to display nativity scenes. In Alsace, along the border of the German states and France, in 1561, a proclamation went out that each burgher or town could have only one Christmas tree, and it could not exceed 8 shoes in height. So apparently the towns in that region had diminished the supply of trees significantly. The German tradition spread throughout Europe during the 1800s because of the marriages of German royalty to other European royalty. They brought the tradition of Christmas trees with them. Although Hessians who fought for the British during the American Revolution and German immigrants who immigrated to the areas like Pennsylvania brought the tradition to the United States, it did not take off until the mid-1800s in North America. Until the outlandishly large trees that appeared in Victorian England and the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, trees were small in size and usually stood on tables with presents hung from their limbs. The tree's gifts were a supplement to the stockings hung on the mantel of the fireplace. As gifts got much larger and became a bigger part of the holiday tradition, gifts could not be attached to the limbs and instead had to be placed underneath the tree. Consequently, as the trees got bigger, they were moved from the table to the floor and the presents started to be placed under it. The Christmas tree has spread all over the world, even to countries whose population is not overly Christian. Japan, after World War II, viewed the traditions of occupational American forces and adopted the Christmas tree and holiday, not out of any religious reasons, but simply as a time of gift-giving. This video already mentioned that Christmas trees did not spring up into American cultural tradition until the mid-1800s. The reason that the United States was so late to adopt the Christmas tree and Christmas is its Puritan background. During the Protestant Reformation, various groups broke away from the Catholic Church. One of these groups was the Puritans, who wanted to purify the Church of England, and they had two reasons for getting rid of Christmas. First, as already mentioned, the Puritans believed that many Catholic practices were innovations that interfered with the spirituality and simplicity of early Christianity, and they wanted to discard popish intrusions. Christmas was one of those features to be eliminated because the Puritans believed it had no biblical warrant, was not practiced in the early church, and was rooted in pagan superstitions. The second major reason for their opposition was the complaint that the Christmas holiday had become overwhelmed by immoral behavior. One propaganda piece of the time was Josiah King's examination and trial of the old Father Christmas, and reprinted thereafter. It described Father Christmas of the town of superstition in the country of idolatry, who was accused of having from time to time abused the people of this commonwealth, drawn and enticing them to drunkenness, gluttony, and unlawful gaming, wantonness, uncleanness, lavishness, cursing, swearing, abuse of the creatures, some to one vice, some to another, all to idleness. These Puritans would make their way to North America. Puritan laws outlawed Christmas, stores were to remain open, and business conducted as usual. Although there were resistance to these laws, the attack on Christmas as a holiday by the Puritans slowed the momentum of the holiday. It was not celebrated with grandeur and became relegated to small celebrations, if at all. It was not only the Puritans who de-emphasized Christmas, but the Quakers, Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians. Although German immigrants who celebrated December 25th came to North America, the celebrations mainly centered around the home or church and not the society at large. The 19th century clergyman Henry Ward Beecher, brother to Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote, "To me, Christmas is a foreign day." Consider this: except for 3 years, the United States Congress met on Christmas Day every year, from 1789 to 1855. However, in the mid-1800s, Christmas gained a resurgence and became what it is today. We can trace our modern style of Christmas festivities from 3 important people: Charles Dickens, Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert. Let's start with Charles Dickens. His book, A Christmas Carol, took the English-speaking world by storm. The book was published in 1843 and almost immediately took off. The book reflects the time period in which Dickens lived. We see Ebenezer Scrooge as a bad person because he would not let his worker Bob Cratchit off on Christmas. But in the 1840s, Christmas was not a universally accepted day off. Plus, Christmas morning, when Scrooge flung open the windows and asked the boy to go buy a turkey, both Scrooge and the boy knew that the store would be open. The book and story, which has been turned into movies, does not mention Jesus or anything particularly religious, except that Scrooge went to church. This allowed both religious and secular people to adopt the themes of charity and caring for one another as people at Christmas time. Like a rock star, Dickens would read the book aloud in auditoriums filled to the brim. In 1867, Boston sold 10,000 tickets to his reading, and in New York, 150 people waited in line all night to get tickets for the show. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert contributed heavily to the development of Christmas being a major holiday. Even though she ascended to the English throne in 1837, she had German roots. She married Prince Albert in 1840, who was also German. Although Christmas traditions had been held in English royalty before, the Puritan resistance had stifled it. Victoria and Albert would bring the German traditions of Christmas to the forefront of the winter holiday season to the English-speaking world. Albert and Victoria erected a Christmas tree each year. The newspapers and people had a fascination with the couple and publicized everything about their Christmas traditions. Additionally, the royal family donated trees to schools and military barracks so those people could properly celebrate the holiday. Newspapers had cover art reflecting the couple along with their children around a lit tree and with presents all around. Christmas was fast becoming a major holiday. Also, the way it was celebrated was changing. No longer was it about adult activities of feasting and drinking among the other activities. It now was about children and family. Children anticipate the presence of no one more than Santa Claus. But how did the idea of a jolly old home invader become one of the most popular symbols of the Christmas holiday? We do know that some of the historical foundation for Santa came from the life and legend of St. Nicholas. He was born in modern-day Turkey and became a bishop of that region for the Catholic Church, and that is as much as we definitely know about the man. But stories circulated about his activities. One of the most famous stories is that the saint, passing by a house, overheard a widowed husband lament that he could not provide a dowry for his 3 daughters, and thus they could never get married. One night, Nicholas dropped a bag of gold through the window as a dowry for his oldest daughter. Then he dropped another bag of gold into the house as a dowry for his second daughter. Suspicious, the widower hid out and caught Nicholas attempting to drop a third bag into the house, but the saint swore him to secrecy and told the widower not to thank him but to thank God. This and many other stories became associated with St. Nicholas. The act of giving gifts and kindness to children and young people became a central theme to his works. He gained considerable fame when an Italian city seeking to gain more tourism through religious pilgrimages went to Asia Minor to steal the remains of Nicholas and put them in their church. The story of the grave robbing made the saint even more famous, and his influence spread. December 6th became St. Nicholas's Day. One of the next phases of St. Nicholas turning into Santa Claus is found in the Dutch Republic. Traditions, cultural adaptations, and religious aspects of St. Nicholas produced the Dutch Sinterklaas. However, to understand this character, we must look at the history of the Dutch Republic. At the time Sinterklaas was taken hold, the Netherlands were under the control of Spain. Spain had expanded exponentially since Columbus's voyage in 1492, and North and South America were not its only conquered territories. It had gained a foothold in Italy and taken over all of the Netherlands or Dutch Republic. Dutch children were told that Sinterklaas spent most of his year in Spain and would visit the Netherlands once a year to give presents to good children. Bad children were the purview of Sinterklaas's assistant, Black Peter, who was traditionally dressed in a turban and dark skin to reflect the Moors who had been expelled from Spain in the late 15th century. Black Peter would punish them with switches, or worse, put the bad children in a bag and away from their families. Eventually, the folklore became that Sinterklaas would ride a white horse from rooftop to rooftop, placing presents in wooden shoes that children placed by the fireplace. Sometimes Black Peter's dark complexion was said to be from soot climbing up and down the chimneys to place the presents. When the Protestant Reformation came about, the idea that people needed no mediary between themselves and God made those who celebrated Christmas turn against using St. Nicholas as the distributor of gifts. In Germany, the Lutherans developed the tradition that the Christ child would distribute the gifts, and instead of it being on December 5th on the eve of St. Nicholas Day, it would be on December 24th, Christmas Eve. In German, the name for the Christ child was Christkindl, which became Christkringl in English. That tradition did not last, however. Other religious groups, hesitant to associate themselves with a Catholic saint, chose other people to distribute the gifts. Christmas Man in Germany, Old Man Winter in Finland, and Father Christmas in England, for example. So where did Santa Claus come from? Well, he came from New York in the early 1800s. In the 1600s, the Dutch were the first to settle New York, but called it New Amsterdam. And we already talked about the Dutch Sinterklaas, a rejuvenation of Dutch tradition by the New York Historical Society in the early 1800s, put an emphasis on St. Nicholas, particularly in the work of The Night Before Christmas, published in 1823. There has been debates on who actually wrote the poem, either Clement Moore or Henry Livingston. No matter the case, when it was republished, it was titled An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus. Thus, by the early 1800s, Sinterklaas had been turned into Santa Claus. This poem created the modern character. He went from a judgmental bishop to a jolly gift-giver. This poem also gave him his 8 tiny reindeer and a sleigh. However, what most people do not realize is that in that poem, Santa is an elf. We have references to 8 tiny reindeer, a miniature sleigh, a little old driver, a little round belly, and it even calls him an elf. Depictions that went along with the poem portray him as a scruffy leprechaun type figure. The man behind creating many of the iconic Santa details can be attributed to Thomas Nast, a German immigrant to New York who was the cartoonist for Harper's Weekly. He invented the Republican elephant and the Democratic donkey, and he also created Santa Claus, at least many of his details. By depicting him in such a widely read publication, Nast's illustration of Santa made a lasting impact because he was the one who placed North Pole as his home, elves being his workers, his role as a toy maker, Santa getting letters from children, and snacks being left by children on Christmas Eve. These iconic symbols of Christmas came from the pen of Thomas Nast. The final artist who deserves credit for the creation of the modern Santa Claus is Hayden Sundblom. He painted images for advertisers. He created images for Maxwell House Coffee, Goodyear Tire, and Aunt Jemima Pancake Mix, to name a few. But it was his creation of Santa Claus for Coca-Cola's winter-themed advertising. It was Sundblom who gave Santa the red and white outfit that matched Coca-Cola's colors and confirmed him as adult-sized. The soft drink company's widespread campaigning for people to drink their products solidified Santa as how we think of him today. One of the biggest complaints from people around the holiday season is that Christmas has lost its meaning, that it has become too commercialized. However, it has been commercialized since the mid to late 1800s. Once the holiday season became about gifts for children, it was a perfect storm with its coinciding with the industrialization which made it possible for mass products to be produced. You are not alone in history if you believe the holiday has become too commercialized. In 1906, a Shop Early campaign fought against stores having extended hours during the season, because that meant workers spent less time with their family. The Society for the Prevention of Useless Giving, or SPUG, fought against the giving of gifts as a social obligation, especially from workers to their bosses. It's important to remember that the previous gifts spoken about before the mid-1800s were small token gifts, and usually homemade. But as long as people buy, the commercialization will continue. An interesting takeaway from this video is that the holiday of Christmas did not grow from the efforts of religious groups. It was pushed by Santa Claus, or at least the idea of him. It had been a low-key holiday for a long time until he arrived on the scene. Santa's jobs of delivering gifts made gifts expected on Christmas, and thus encouraged buying more and more extravagant gifts. And with stores placing more emphasis on the holiday, it has grown exponentially. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you have not done so. As always, the Facebook, Patreon, and Twitter page links are in the description below, as well as the link to the channel's Teespring store. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next week.